Hey boys and girls, let's talk about boys and girls today. Population trends and the future of humanity. We're gonna start with talking about the landscape. Where do we find ourselves? If you look at the fertility rates, don't paint a rosy picture for humanity. Take South Korea for example, where it's predicted that at its current replacement level of 0.7, they're gonna have around 4.6 people alive after 2 generations. Up to 3 generations. So that is to say that for every 100 people alive in South Korea, if nothing changes in terms of the fertility rate, they're going to have 4.6-ish people, 4.6 grandkids. Yeah, that paints a terrible picture. Then you've got to look at Japan, which is losing almost 1 million people now. It lost, I think, 800,000 people last year. They're outselling adult diapers by a huge margin. Then you've got to look at Russia, which for some goddamn reason chose to just commit harakiri. They didn't have the most favorable demographics, to put it mildly, because of the legacy of the decisions that they made in obviously World War II, and yet they decide to allow the most important asset that they have, young men, they allow that asset to be butchered into a completely mindless war. And yeah, that is suicidal to say the least. Then you look at Ukraine, which might cease to exist as a nation if things don't improve on the ground substantially over the next few years. A lot of young Ukrainian people have left the country, a lot of young people have died. I read that they made the decision to send all the soldiers to the front line, which is a really sensible decision. But when they're losing people at the rate that they have, and when the country itself becomes a wasteland because of Russia's barbaric war, decision making in terms of just destroying infrastructure, as much as I want the Ukrainians to win, as much as I want the Ukrainian country to flourish, things don't look great for them. Then you look at the fertility rates in countries like Italy, Spain, Romania, Greece, where again the populations are expected to halve before the end of the century, and that's the case for South Korea. Well, South Korea obviously is going to be much dire. That's the case for Japan, losing much more than half its population. China, they're going to lose more than half the population. Then you've got the only countries that are growing, that have got fertility rates significantly above the replacement level, are countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Every other region on the planet, even places like the Middle East, places like South Asia, places like Latin America, their fertility rates are very close to, or in some places, in some regions, below fertility rates. So that's the landscape. Now, sure, okay, this is interesting, but why should we care about it? And just another note, the only reason that the countries in West Europe and North America, namely USA and Canada, the only reason they're growing is because of immigration. But you still have to import people from somewhere else, right? So what happens when there are no people that can be imported to these nations? And it could very well be the case that we are fast approaching these questions. Okay, so that's the landscape, right? But why should we, actually, before we go on to talk about why should we care about it, maybe you can start by talking about why people are choosing not to have kids, because it just seems like the most natural thing to do, right? The biological imperative that is there is to have kids, is to basically propagate our genes. So why would humans be making choices that are not optimal for the continued flourishing of the species? Because humans have outgrown their own biological imperative to a large degree, right? We can choose with birth control, with all sorts of other technologies. We can choose to play with these imperatives the way we want to, rather than these imperatives being the thing that dictates how we spend our lives. And to be honest, no one wants to. Someone were to live completely by their biological imperative, they would be no different from an animal. But okay, so why do people not have kids, right? The low quality of mates. You look around the world, and this is not me saying that the quality of mates is low for person X. I'm just saying that in general, if you ask most people, they would say that There are no good people out there are no good men out there, or there are no good women out there. There are hardly any. That's what most people say. And partly this has got to do with our expectations, right? So if you watch loads of Hollywood movies, if you spend a lot of time on Instagram and YouTube and you see these perfect relationships, or at least a portrayal of perfect relationships, which might not actually be perfect, but they might just create this illusion for the viewers, then you might think that anything which is even a bit below that is subpar. So that's a tiny bit of it, but more than that, the kinds of lifestyles that most people choose to live, it just happens to make most people's suitability as mates subpar, right? So take college going as a trend. More and more, less and less men are going to college, and more women are going to college. Now there's a thing called hypergamy, which is to say that women would choose to mate only with a social status that is across them or above them, right? The problem is, it's not quite a problem, it's a problem in the sense that, yeah, it's not a problem per se, it's a problem because of the dynamics. It's a problem because as more and more women choose to go to college, and as less and less men choose to go to college, so I think in England, the imbalance is 60% women and 40% men. In the US, it's, I think, somewhere along those lines still. So women, because of that hypergamous nature, and that's how it should be, right? Because women are the ones who choose the mates, and who, well, not choose the mates, but they're the ones who dictate the progeny, the quality of the progeny that is passed on, that's propagated. So they're the gatekeepers, basically. And you want the gatekeepers to have the highest standards and filters in mind. So this is actually a really good thing for humanity. It just, as with many other things, it just becomes suboptimal when some other things tend to overlay on top. And in this case, what's been happening is a lot of men, some psychologists have called this a generation of lost men. There's loads of people who do not have social skills, who spend their lives in front of the screen, playing video games, smoking stuff, those sort of things. Again, this is not a moral judgment, by the way, I'm just saying, this is what I wanted to start off with, that this is not a piece where I try to talk about how I feel about these things. I'm just here to lay out the facts, to connect the dots, and try to make sense of these things and try to see where these things go. And the only bias that I want, if there's one bias that might come through in this discussion, the one bias that I could be happy with, that I wouldn't find problematic if it were to come through, would be the bias, the pro-human bias that I want. I want the best for humanity, and yeah, that's it. But yeah, the quality of mates has obviously been on the decline. Then we've got, there's no societal pressure or familial pressure on us, right? We can choose to chart our own courses, which is obviously how it should be. Again, this goes back to my point that the reasons I'm giving here, why people are not choosing to have kids, these are not reasons, these are not negative reasons or positive reasons in my eyes, these are just reasons I'm laying them out for the view of this video. Then also, the world has become really easy to navigate. If you compare our lives to the lives of our ancestors, even a generation back, and the further you go, the more difficult it gets for them. Human lives, as Hobbes said, were short and brutish. Our lives are anything but, right? You can have everything at your fingertips. You can have the best life possible, expending the littlest energy possible. You can, at an average wage, go travel around the world, have the best experiences, these kind of experiences that a king in the 14th century, even the richest king, King Louis the 14th, I don't know what time period he lived in, but he would literally have killed for the kinds of experiences that the average person didn't have now, right? You can travel, again, with the average wage, you can do the kinds of things that would be unimaginable to even people a generation back. Then there's the money anxiety. A lot of people choose not to have kids because, yeah, again, part of this is expectations, because it's not that they can't have kids on their wage, it's just that the more prosperous we go, the more we want our kids to have the best life possible, and the higher expectations grow of what does a good life entail for our kids. And those expectations are never able to keep pace for a lot of people. They're not able to keep pace with the money that they actually earn. So there's a gap there. That's the money problem. Then there's the anxiety problem, right? So many people are, and part of this is the mental health epidemic that a lot of people are suffering with. So depression, anxiety, all sorts of other mental health issues. But I want to pick up on anxiety in particular. A lot of young people, especially, when you ask them, why do you not want to have kids? They're going to say that climate change, right, it's going to destroy the world. What's the point of having kids? Or a lot of people are concerned about wars. A lot of people are concerned about AI takeover. Remember this guy, I think it was Mo Gabtat. This guy, he was a Google X engineer. He's worked on some pretty interesting projects, and there was this time period, I think last year, where he was just doing the rounds of tons of podcasts, popular podcasts, and one of the things that he said in a lot of these podcasts was that people should not be having kids for the next few years, because you don't know how this is going to pan out. And if it pans out in the negative direction, why would you want to bring life into the world when that life is going to suffer, right? So yeah, a lot of people think along the same lines, that why would I want to bring life into the world when I know that life is going to suffer? So that's the rational argument that a lot of people. Then there's this capitalist psyop, the psychological operations, where after World War II, in Europe and in North America, there were a lot of vacancies, and part of this is obviously a good thing. So let me just try to differentiate between the good part and the bad part, right? So when women choose to go to the workplace of their own volition, that's obviously a good thing. But what happened, and if you look at the literature, this is what happened. There were these, I wouldn't call them propaganda, but there was this impression created in the minds of the people, the hoi polloi, that going to work is how you empower yourself. And again, it's a should statement, right? Yeah, so the impression that was created in culture that it's almost a moral duty of every woman to be in the workplace rather than her having the choice to be a stay-at-home mom. And this is something which Simone de Beauvoir, who was one of the most prominent feminists, to quote her exact words, she said that no woman should be authorized to stay at home and raise her children. Society should be different. Women should not have that choice, precisely because if there is such a choice, too many women will make that choice. Yeah. Yeah. So that was obviously a part of it. Then there's no great ways to meet people, right? Your workplace, you're not going to be exposed to too many people in your workplace, or in your university, you're not going to find the person for you. In your workplace, again, you're not going to be exposed to a lot of people, and as people become more picky, it would just make sense for them to come across more people, more choices. But the way the one world is designed, with the lack of total spaces, it's just as difficult for people to come across the kinds of people, because dating apps are optimized for certain kinds of things, and that's not what a lot of people might be looking for. So that's another problem. Then there's the decline in religion, which has removed one of the most common ways by which people could have found the potential mate or partner, by going to church and meeting someone there. Then you've got the desire for freedom, right? Having kids, which reduce your optionality radically, it cannot be overstated how big I wouldn't say a burden, but how big a responsibility having kids is. It changes everything. And yeah, I'm speaking from experience. It changes everything. And a lot of people, they do want to have that freedom. They do want to have that optionality. So that's another reason. Also, life's become so good, right? As I mentioned. So why would people forego all the good stuff they've got for something that might be good, but which a lot of the modern culture has portrayed to be something burdensome? So that's a part of it. Then there's sex. Yeah, I know, but hear me out. So ironically, the very thing that sex was designed for by natural evolution has become one of the barriers to having kids. Yeah, I know it sounds convoluted, but I'll tell you why. So, because sex is such a compelling thing, the most, probably the greatest thing for most people, right? People want to keep on experiencing it for the longest time possible. As soon as you have kids, and this is shown by evidence, you're not going to be able to have it at the same frequency, and you're going to, well, pretty much drop off the radar. Most people are. And people, again, register that, and then people think about the fact that do they want to give up the thing that gives them the most pleasure. And yeah, this does play a role in a lot of people, well, a tiny bit of role, right? Because it's not one reason that people choose not to have kids. For a lot of people, for everyone, it's a confluence of different reasons, but this is one of the reasons why people choose not to have kids. Then you've got the absolute trauma and horror of childbirth. If you just listen to the descriptions, or yeah, you do wonder how did we even actually propagate to the degree that we've got 8 billion of us living on the planet? Women, they must be the hardiest souls out there, right? David Goggins got nothing on even the average woman. Yeah, so childbirth, the dynamics, the mechanics of it, that's, yeah. Then we've got the changing values and outlooks around things like sex, relationships, hookups. Then we've got access to unlimited pleasure, right? Because having kids, it takes a toll on you. And it's not quite, you wouldn't associate having kids with being a pleasure-centric activity. And the world in which pleasure can be had so easily, to the degree that you want, as many times as you want, a lot of people do find the pleasure option to be much more compelling than having a kid option, having a kid or kids option. Then along the same lines, you got pornography, which in an indirect way, what it does is it disincentivizes people to go out and meet new people, because the urge to mate is the strongest urge in all of us, right? The biological imperative, the sexual imperative, the mating imperative. But if you replace that artificially with adult content, then that's going to dissuade a lot of people who might have gone out to the world and who might have gotten into long-term relationships, and some of those might have turned into relationships with kids. So that again has been one of the factors. And again, along the same lines, the instant gratification generation that we are becoming, right? You've got Netflix for entertainment, you've got Uber Eats for food, you've got TikTok, you've got, again, pornography, you've got all these kinds of things. And everything's available at the tip of your finger, and you want everything instantaneously, right? We don't want to wait. And we don't want to, that changes our psychology, that changes our expectations on what we ought to want from life. And we wouldn't want things which take a long time to give us meaning and give us pleasure, right? And having a child, it is as long term as it gets, right? Because for the first, I don't know, 3-4 years, sure, you might derive some pleasure, but you're not going to have great conversations with your kid. I mean, it's going to take a while before you have great conversations with your kid. And I don't think that's the reason why people choose to have kids. But it's going to be a while before. The first few years are the most horrific, right? Because you're being woken up in a given night every, I don't know, few hours. Most parents, they say that they hardly get a few hours of sleep. The first few years are the most difficult. You're choosing to do one of the most difficult things that a person can do for rewards later down the line. And those rewards could be your expectations of what a good life is, your sense, the places where you derive your joy, your meaning, your pleasure from, those sort of things. But as we become more instant gratification seeking, we become less incentivized to want to partake into activities like child rearing and nurturing a kid into adulthood. So that's another reason. I think these probably cover the main reasons. Yeah. So let's move on to oh yeah, just quick note before we move on to the next thing. This actually could be one of the great filters, right? As soon as a species becomes as advanced to the level of technological sophistication that we have, where it can do all sorts of things, it has the power of gods, where we're gonna have that soon, where we can create artificial worlds that simulate us in all sorts of ways, in all the ways that we want. We can create the perfect world for us, and we can, yeah, once a civilization reaches that, how do you fight against, how do you resist the urge to actually choose this most easy, most fun, most enjoyable, most pleasure-giving life, and choose to do something that is darn difficult? You had to actively choose the biological imperative, right? I'm going to call it the life imperative because I don't want to sound anthropocentric. I don't want to be anthropocentric as such. But I would imagine that life, wherever it arises in the cosmos, it must have the life imperative, because if it can't propagate, it's not going to be life for too long, right? So this must be one of the few things that might be common across life, across the cosmos. The question that arises is, how do you actually, once you reach the point of technological sophistication where you can create the perfect world for you, how do you convince yourself to choose to do something that is damn difficult? So that's a question that a lot of civilizations might have wrestled with in the past, and they might not have crossed that hurdle. So this could be one of the great filters. While I was thinking about this particular thing, that's what I thought about. And yeah, one quick note about this. You probably should expect this to get worse, this trend to get worse. And the reason for that is AI, boyfriends and girlfriends, right? So there are things that, think of it, for a lot of people, love is not ethereal. Love is not something divine, it's functional, right? And what's functional is something you can define in words. So something which is divine, per se, or ethereal, it's harder to define, it's more abstract. But something which is a functional thing, it's more easier to define, and something that's easy to define can be easier to build or replicate, right? So we are at a stage where a lot of the jobs to be done, which is a phrase which is from a book written by Christian Clayson, which is an iconic business book, talking about how the best way to build a product is to look at what job does it do, right? So for humans, I don't want to objectify humans, but a lot of people have become, so going back to why people choose not to have kids, a lot of people have started objectifying humans, started looking at humans as commodities rather than humans with this essence of humanity, this ethereal essence. I don't want to say divine because I don't believe in that, but I'll use it in a secular sense, right? There's this divinity to humans, to our fellow humans, that seems to have left a lot of the modern discourse and modern culture, which is a depressing thing, and it speaks of the kinds of things which might happen in the future. But yeah, the reason we could expect this to get worse is that all the jobs to be done that you want from your partner, now we can have AIs that can do almost all of those jobs, right? Except for the humanity part of it. Now, a lot of people, especially as it becomes more and more difficult, especially as the quality of mates degrades over time, it just becomes, and especially because a lot of things which were not normalized back in the day, they'll become perfectly, take online dating, right? If you go back to 20 years ago, if you said that I found this person through online dating, people would laugh at you, people would ridicule you, people would be making fun of you for the rest of your life. And now it has become the most common way to find people in the United States, in North America, and in most of the Western world, I'd say. So yeah. So my point is that we could be moving towards a world where these things which seem very dystopian, and they are dystopian, don't get me wrong, they are the most dystopian thing that can be. That these dystopian looking like things, seeming things, they can become so normalized that they would be everywhere. So yeah, that could just make this worse. Okay, so let's talk about why is this a concern, right? Okay, the populations are declining and they don't look to be in a good shape. The fertility trends don't look to be in a good shape. Why even give a damn about this? Why should we care? We should care about this because the one thing that we ought to come to consensus about, one of the things that we ought to come to consensus about is humanity is worth fighting for. Humanity is the most beautiful thing. Humanity is the flame of consciousness must be kept aflame for the longest time possible. We ought to want humanity to flourish and thrive and spread across the cosmos like a plague, not like a plague, spread across the cosmos for the next billions of years and numbering into the trillions. That's what we want, right? That's the future we would want. Because most of us, we've got people that we deeply care about. And we can imagine a world in which we would want more love to be there in the world, more consciousness to be there, and for those things to be there, you would want and need more humans to be there. So that's the simplest argument, right? Why should we care about it? Because we care about the future of humanity, and the future of humanity requires there to be humans in the first place. We care about love and consciousness, and we care about, we care about the human things. And without humans, we won't have human things. So that's a part of it. Then you've got the cultures which seem to be on the path to vanishing, to self-destruction. I wouldn't say self-destruction, but vanishing, right? If the trend doesn't continue, then some of these cultures could be wiped off the face of the planet in the next few centuries, or even before then. And we have seen cultures get wiped off the face of the planet countless times throughout history. So this is not something new. This is not something that has never happened. It happens all the time. That's been the rule of nature. Some of these cultures, a lot of these cultures, one could argue most of these cultures, they've got, all these cultures rather, they've got beautiful things in them, unique things in them, unique elements in them. The literature, the arts, the literature, the music, the traditions and customs of the Korean culture, or the Japanese culture, or the Russian culture, or the Greek culture. All of these things, they're a legacy, and we ought to cherish it, and we ought to prolong it for the longest time. If we lose these, it would be a loss along the lines of the loss of the Library of Alexandria, or the extinguishing of the Roman Empire, which once it ceased to become, it created the Dark Ages for Europe for the next many centuries. And so if you lose cultures, if you lose great cultures, if you lose great ideas, that could be a harbinger of things to come. Then there's a problem of existence, right? Again, going back to the first one, we want to exist for the longest time possible. Apart from the fact that we want human things, there's also the practical matter of things, that the more humans there are, and the more spread out they are, the better our chance of humanity surviving, right? Because let's say there are loads of alien species out there. Let's say that they decide to attack humans. Or let's say that things, the laws of nature, the laws of physics, they manifest something which we just couldn't have foreseen, and the structure of space starts to come apart, and that kills an entire galaxy worth of people. This is a ridiculous scenario. I don't know why I cooked this up. but my point is that there are so many different ways that a species, a planet could become devoid of life, right? So the best way to counter this risk is to spread humanity across the cosmos, across the galaxies. And for that, we would want to have trillions of humans, so a few billion humans on every single planet that we can inhabit, right? Again, for that we need tons of humans, well, trillions of them. Then, again, going back to the first thing, all the good stuff we feel, almost all of that has to do with people, right? Especially as AI takes over intellectual tasks, this just becomes more and more true. The social connection we've got with our loved ones, with our friends, with our families, that becomes ever more important in the world in which AI takes over everything else, right? And yeah, it's just good to have that human thing, and yeah. The less humans we have, the less scope there is for the good stuff. Then there's this unique beauty to having kids, to nurturing life, that this tends to refine a lot of people. This tends to get a lot of people started on the path of self-actualization, get a lot of people started on the path of building great things, achieving great things. And there's just something, again, I don't want to use that word, but there's just something divine to care about a life to the degree that a parent cares about their child's life. That's something that probably is one of the most beautiful aspects of humanity, right? That kind of love, that selfless love that parents have for their kids. And the less kids we have, the less you would see that in the world, and that would be a loss. Right, so that's why we ought to, why we might want to have, why we want to have more people, right? We ought to have more people. Let's quickly make the case for why the current trend lines are right. So we argued why we want to have humans, trillions of them. The next obvious part is the solutions. Before we move on to that, I just want to make a quick note about what a lot of people say, especially people who worship at the altar of AI and technology. They say that, if AI takes over from humanity and renders us extinct, or if we become a new species, different species, completely indistinguishable from, or rather, completely remote from our current state and form, that shouldn't be considered to be a problem, because Darwin in evolution states survival of the fittest. And whatever survives, that ought to be the thing that survives. That's the roundabout rationale that a lot of cyclical rationale that a lot of people give. I consider that to be the most fatalistic attitude, right? Let's imagine that aliens out there. Oh, another reason why we ought to have, I forgot to mention this. Another reason we ought to have humans in the universe is that the universe without life is absolutely pointless. If there's nothing to observe the universe, if there's nothing that can behold the beauty and the awe of the universe, the wonders of it, then the universe is a completely pointless place. It's the observers, it's life, it's consciousness which gives universe not just its meaning, but its essence, right? In the void of a universe having no life, it is, as I said, a completely pointless universe. And there's a scenario, you can imagine this. I don't want to, it's impossible to assign a p-value to this, but there's a chance that we could be the only intelligent species in the universe. In which case, it becomes our greatest moral duty to spread the flame of consciousness to the universe. Because that's the thing which makes the universe come alive, both literally and metaphorically. And we want there to be a universe which is alive, which is bursting with all the good things. And if we are the only creatures, entities, race, species that can give the universe this good thing, these good qualities, then it just becomes incumbent on us to do our damnedest and utmost to accomplish that objective of just having as many humans as possible. So that would be another reason why. And that could actually, well, I wouldn't say that would be the core reason. It could be core reason if we are the only species in the universe, the only intelligent species. But if we are not, then that might not be the most important reason. Yeah, so going back to what we were talking about, the argument made by a lot of people who are enamored by the tech, the miracles of the tech world, and the argument that they make, that is very fatalistic. Because what makes us special? And a lot of people actually use the argument that because AIs are going to be more intelligent than us, it just makes more sense for them to survive and for them to thrive, and even if it's at the cost of our own existence. And that's the most ridiculous argument, right? So, and I'll tell you why. The reason that we used to pray at the altar of intelligence is that used to be what separated us from, well, that used to be the most distinct quality that separated us from all of the life on our planet. But in the universe in which we've got intelligent species, that is artificial intelligence, we can just consider it as a species at this point in time. If we've got a more intelligent species, then we wouldn't look at intelligence as being the thing which makes us special. We would look at our own humanity, the essence of humanity, the love that we feel, the consciousness that we have, the compassion we have and we feel for other people in our lives, or even people not in our lives for that matter. It's those things which would make it special, which would make our species special. And nothing can take that away, right? The expressions of humanity, like art and culture, music, those sort of things. Nothing can take that away. Okay, so now that we've converged upon the conclusion that, okay, we want to have more humans, how do you solve this problem? Because this could get ugly real quick, right? This could, if a pandemic happens, and human behavior is notoriously slow to change, right? It's notoriously more difficult to reverse directions. And because the trend line has been in terms of decreasing population for quite some time now, it would be really difficult to change its course, to reverse direction. So if something catastrophic were to happen, it would put us in a really precarious state. And we don't want to be there, right? We don't want to be in a precarious state. So, what do we do? What are the solutions? What's ahead? The obvious solutions, the solutions that most governments have tried, be it in Singapore, be it in Japan and South Korea, have been policy decisions, but they have not gone far enough. So what they'll try to do is maternal benefits, paternal holidays, those sort of things, right? These obviously haven't gone far enough because the numbers have not budged. They must have budged, or they might have budged, but not by much at all, not meaningfully anyways. So that's obviously not working. You need to go further, and we need to realize that the most important figure for a civilization which cares about its survival and its flourishing is the mother, right? Because she's the one who propagates the species forward. So you just need to have more warm-friendly policies in place. So that would be one. Then there would be creating a more human first world, right? Instead of the capitalist hellhole that a lot of the world has become. That would be a solution to this. There's a lot of companies, a lot of regions, especially if you look at the places in the world which have got pretty depressed fertility rates, these places also tend to have a high level of capitalism ingrained in their systems. So South Korea is one of the most capitalist systems, and Japan is one of the most capitalist systems in its own way. And regions in America which have got some of the lowest fertility rates, like California, New York, again, hyper-capitalist. So we got to look at that. We got to look at what the new modes of being and new kinds of economies that we need to build and internalize. They can allow us to build the world that we want to live, where people can make the choices that they want to make, right? Because if people don't have money, or if they feel that there's a scarcity of resources, then you're not actually allowing them the choice. Even though, because a lot of women, they say they would love to have kids, but they don't because of money. They don't because of societal structures in Japan and South Korea. So if we remove these hurdles, then that goes a long way towards solving the problem. Then there are other solutions, like finding meaning through difficult but worthwhile things. So culture, again, it's placed this thing at the top that pleasure is the greatest thing ever, right? We need to move past that. We need to move past that. Then we need to reframe things. Being a stay-at-home mom is seen to be a taboo thing, or is frowned upon in a lot of parts of the world, and that needs to change, or that should change, or that could be a potential solution to some degree. Then there are solutions, technological solutions like artificial wombs, factory farming of babies. That sounds very dystopian, but that might be the only way to save our species. Something else that could happen in the near future is engineering humans to optimize for things that might help us have more people. So having faster timelines of growth, of conception to thingy. And optimizing for the kinds of things that being able to conceive more babies at the same time, right? Because let's look at it this way, right? If a woman's got, I don't know, 35,000 eggs, I could be way off about this number, but it's thousands of eggs, right? And the sperm, well, not a sperm, but ejaculation has millions of sperms, right? So theoretically, you could produce tons of babies at the same time if we could create the technology to actually allow these fertilized eggs to be incubated at the same time. So there are things that could happen in the future that humans might have to do. And these might look very dystopian to us, and they are to our sensibilities, but we do well to not judge our successors, because they might be put in a situation because of our choices where they might not have any other option. While I was thinking about this particular thing, I remembered this line from my favorite movie of all time, Interstellar, where this guy who's been woken up from his sleep after years, he basically fools them into, I mean, I don't want to go into the details, but he fakes data so that these people come to pick him up, rescue him, or not rescue him, but to set up shop over there. And then he says that I fabricated the data because I wanted you guys to come rescue me. And while they're fighting, well, Merv and what's the name of this guy, this character? Matt Damon. And I don't remember his name in the movie. While they're fighting, Matt Damon says that, don't judge me, human have been tested the way I have. And yeah, that just speaks to how we're so quick to judge, and we've got no place to judge our successors, because they'll have to make the kind of difficult choices that might seem extremely weird to us, but we got to remember that our sensibilities, our values change radically over time, right? So what used to seem completely fine to our ancestors, that seems abhorrent to us, all sorts of things. And same could be the case for the inverse, right? What would seem completely abhorrent to them seems perfectly fine to us. And yeah, that could be for the same dynamic could happen for us and for our successors. So this could be a potential solution. And yeah, well, the thing about this, I couldn't resist the temptation of watching the scene, which is such a moving scene where this guy, he's basically put humanity at risk by calling them, and then he reads this poem, he narrates this poem, which is again one of my favorite poems, Rage Rages Against the Dying of the Light. And what I would say is, humanity is going to fight for its future. It's going to fight. We are going to rage against the dying of the light. We've got this thing in us. It might take long, it might be difficult, but we're going to get it right. We've got to get it right. Because the most powerful thing there is in the universe is love, right? There's no way that we allow that to die. This most precious of things. Another thing that we could potentially do, and this is the most suboptimal solution of all these solutions, is uploading ourselves digitally. That way we could have billions of copies. But we do love to live in this meat suit, in this meat space. So I don't think that, I mean, there could be trend lines, there are trend lines which are pushing us in that direction. I just don't like where we are heading with that particular thing. Because, yeah, it's just not great for us. I can talk about that in a later episode. Yeah, what a lot of people say is that, how would this work, right? You want to have trillions of humans, you want to have trillions of humans, and you want to have each human have a lifespan of thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. How would that work, right? It would work because the one thing that universe doesn't lack in is space and resources, right? We could have trillions, quadrillions, quintillions, sextillions of humans living long lives. I think that probably might reach because there's the limits on how big the universe is and how much. The sad thing about the universe is that more than 99% of stars have actually died already. So most of the usable energy, which is what you need to nurture life, has already become completely useless. So that's sad. But my point is that there's no universe where we would actually hit upon the limits of how much space we've got, because the cosmos are vast. They're not endless, but they could be endless, by the way, but they are not limited in space and resources. So, okay, that's that then. What are the two, let's talk about, for wrapping up, let's talk about the two possible end games, right? One is we decide to actually have more humans, and two is we decide to have a stable state solution, right? Where we don't have a ton of kids, but we choose to, okay, that, let's say 10 billion, that's how many we want to have, and choose to just move forward with having that number of people. How could that work? That could work a different way. Things this could work, right? For the first scenario, one of the things that evolution, one of the advantages of having people die after a certain span of time is ideas, new ideas, right? Because people are notoriously bad at changing their minds. And if people don't change their minds, things don't improve. Because if nothing changes, nothing changes. So death has been a blessing in a way, in terms of allowing the kind of radical improvements that it has. If people didn't die, they would just choose to do the same thing over and over again. They would choose not to explore, they would choose not to take risks. But because if you've got 1 billion years to live, you're not going to take risks, right? You've got a lot more to lose than someone who's going to live 35 years. So you're going to find it a lot more difficult to convince someone who's going to live 1,000 years to go on an expedition to a new island, which turns out to be landfall in in Americas. So it's just going to be, death has been useful in all sorts of ways, but this has been also ways, right? So how would the universe work? How would a world work in which people are living long lives, really long lives, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years? We could, with robotic, with AI enhancements, we could have more agile humans that has got this element of changing their minds. So that could be a potential thing. But the problem with the scenario is, apart from the fact that more humans are good, as we just talked about, the problem, the fatal problem, and this is literally fatal, is that there's so many different ways species could be rendered extinct if they are just situated in one planet, in one local region of the universe, right? Gamma ray bursts, alien invasions, pandemics, meteor strikes, all sorts of global wars, nuclear wars, all sorts of things that could just render a species extinct. The best, you ought to, if you're an intelligent species, you ought to have contingency plans by having spread yourself out across as much of an area as possible, as much of a volume as possible. So you'd be smart to heed that. The second thing that, the second stage end game is that we spread across the cosmos at the rate of millions, inhabiting planets at the rate of millions per day, and live long lives across the cosmos, across galaxies, and become gods in the process, right? That's, I do hope that that's a future that we choose to, that that's a path that we choose to follow. Because humanity is not only worth fighting for, humanity is worth multiplying, and humanity is worth spreading across the cosmos. We don't know any other species, right? There could be a species which could be more forget about intelligence, because we are not even the most intelligent at this point. But it's a foregone conclusion, we are not going to be the most intelligent species on the planet. But that could be better in terms of its values, right? I mean, this is a very philosophical discussion, so maybe I don't want to talk about it in this video, but let's imagine this quick thought experiment, right? Imagine a species which is far superior to us in every single way, morally, ethically, spiritually. What does that even mean? In terms of intelligence, right? Would you not want that species to thrive across the cosmos, to spread across the cosmos, rather than humans? Well, to that I would say that humanity is the only species we know, which has got all the good qualities that we know. And if we do come across that species, we'll cross that bridge when we do. Maybe we could even fuse with that species, right? But until the point that we are the only species on the planet, we ought to, it should be our sacred duty to spread across the cosmos, to multiply our species, and to multiply the love and the consciousness and the compassion and the beauty and the joy and the wonder that humans feel and are capable of. So on that note, I'll wrap it up. And yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.